She was screaming at a glitter sign. I mean, full volume, clipboard wielding, vein throbbing rage. At a 10-year-old girl's glitter sign that said, "Welcome home, Grandpa." And that was how our HOA president, Brenda Desaire, the dictator of driveways, declared war on a retired judge who just wanted peach pie and family hugs. She had rules printed on cardstock. He had 30 years of legal carnage under his belt. By the time she finished yelling about unauthorized signage, she was already planning her downfall. With a cup of coffee and a smirk, they brought laminated rules. I brought 30 years of legal warfare. It was a Sunday morning dipped in sunlight and syrup. My niece Ella had spent all night bedazzling a wooden sign that read, "Welcome home, Grandpa," in so much purple glitter it looked like a disco ball had exploded on it. She stuck it right at the front yard, next to her kiddie pool, in a suspiciously militant-looking garden gnome. My cousin was in the kitchen pulling a pie from the oven, peach, because nothing says retirement celebration like fruit baked under pressure. The air smelled like cinnamon, hope, and cleaning products. Elliot Harper had just retired after 3 decades as a state judge, known across multiple counties by his affectionate courtroom nickname, the executioner in robes, which, by the way, wasn't a metaphor. The man once sentenced a mayor, 2 fraud pastors, and a dog breeder in a single afternoon. He didn't come to play. And now he just wanted to meet his grandkids, eat a slice of pie, and maybe fall asleep on a porch swing. Simple, right? Enter HOA Karen, because of course. The trouble announced itself with the whine of a golf cart. HOA grade, beige, obnoxiously slow, and somehow louder than a Harley. We opened the front door just in time to see Brenda, president of the HOA, queen of khakis and passive aggression, step out with a clipboard like she was about to deliver a parking citation to God. She didn't say hello. She didn't acknowledge Ella's glittery masterpiece. She just pointed down the street toward Grandpa Elliot's approaching car, a humble silver sedan that looked more like a church usher than a threat. "That vehicle," she said, "has not been pre-approved by the HOA." We blinked. She continued, "Visitors must be submitted via Form 7B no later than 72 hours before arrival. Your guest is in direct violation." My mother nearly dropped her casserole. I stepped forward, already feeling my blood pressure warm up like a microwave burrito. "Ma'am, that's my father." She didn't flinch. "Rules are rules," she said, as if quoting divine scripture. "If he does not leave immediately, consequences will follow." Elliot stepped out of the car just then, holding a brown paper bag that smelled faintly of cinnamon rolls and vengeance. He paused, took one look at the glitter sign, then glanced at Brenda with a calm that made her clipboard nervous. "Is that laminated?" he asked, nodding toward her paper. Brenda snorted. "This is official HOA business. We don't need notaries." Elliot gave a little smile, the kind of smile you make when you know the judge because you are the judge. "Let them enjoy their rules," he said quietly to me. Then he turned around, got back in his car, and drove off like a cowboy leaving a saloon. Inside, the silence was heavier than the casserole. Elda's sign wilted slightly in the heat. My cousin muttered something unholy under her breath, and my uncle threatened to build a trebuchet. But me? I stared at Brenda marching back to her golf cart like a mall cop who just won a war, and I knew exactly what had happened. She thought she'd won. She thought the rules were on her side. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this wasn't just a retired man with a sugar craving and glitter-wielding grandkids. This was Elliot Harper, former judge, current problem, and the only man I knew who could dismantle a bureaucracy with nothing but a legal pad and a cup of black coffee. And Karen? Oh, sweet laminated soul. She had no idea what she'd just unleashed. That night we gathered in the kitchen like generals after a defeat. The casserole had gone cold, the glitter sign was leaning against a trash can, and my cousin had that "I'm about to write a nasty post on Facebook" look in her eyes. "We should sue," someone muttered, "or at least egg her house." But Ellie, calm as ever, sipping a cup of coffee so black it probably had its own moral compass, just raised a finger and said, "Send me your HOA documents, all of them." That's when we knew something had shifted. See, my father doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't throw things. What he does do is take apart laws like a mechanic pulling apart an engine made of lies and bad fonts. This is a man who once overturned a city ordinance because the footnote was improperly cited in Helvetica instead of Times New Roman. Petty? Maybe. But effective? You better believe it. I've seen him work. He reads bylaws like bedtime stories, highlights clauses like he's painting a masterpiece. By the time he finishes marking up a document, it looks like a rainbow got into a bar fight with a law library. So when he asked for the HOA charter, I didn't ask questions. I just scanned every page. Visitor policies, landscaping rules, holiday decoration height limits, and yes, even the official regulation on acceptable seasonal inflatable dimensions. 2 days later, he called me, just 2 words, it's illegal. Apparently, the visitor pre-approval policy that got him banished from his own family reunion wasn't just cruel, it was fabricated. The HOA had updated that clause without a community vote, which directly violated their own charter. Not only that, but the clause itself didn't even apply to family members. It was originally drafted for renters and short-term Airbnb guests. Basically, people showed up with a suitcase and bad intentions, not a retired judge carrying homemade pastries. But wait, it gets worse. While digging deeper, Dad found an entire subsection labeled Community Harmony Enforcement. Sounds peaceful, right? Yeah, until you read the footnotes. One resident had been fined $200, 0 cents for flying the American flag on Memorial Day, too early apparently. Another had received 3 separate warnings for letting their child draw chalk dinosaurs on the sidewalk. Graffiti, they called it. And then there was poor Mrs. Langston, bless her heart, written up for placing lavender flower pots near her front steps. Clashing colors, said the report. I mean, imagine declaring war on purple. And through all this, Brenda had signed every notice with the same overzealous squeal, like a discount royal seal. My dad took notes, cross-referenced dates, even plotted a timeline that looked more like a crime board from a detective show than a neighborhood dispute. Mini hook, here's one. Brenda once fined a neighbor for leaving their garage door open too long, inviting pests and crime, the citation said. The neighbor was hosting a charity car wash for orphans. You can't make this stuff up. I asked Dad if he was going to take them to court. He just smiled and said, lawsuits are blunt instruments. I prefer scalpels. Then he poured himself another cup of coffee, opened a fresh yellow notepad and whispered, like a man preparing for surgery, let's begin. They thought barring him from his grandkids was a win, but when a man like Elliot Harper gets quiet, that's not peace, it's preparation. Elliot's dining table had become a war room. Not the dramatic kind with maps and red pens, but the legal kind, with land surveys, zoning documents, and a magnifying glass that hadn't seen action since Watergate. He didn't pace. He didn't rant. He just sat, calmly turning pages like he was solving a crossword, written in passive aggression. Then, without even looking up, he said, this gate, it's on your land, Marcus. I blinked. Come again? He pushed a faded map across the table, yellowed at the edges, and stamped with the 1998 seal from the county assessor's office. This driveway, what the HOA now calls community access pathway, was part of your grandfather's parcel before the HOA even existed. They never filed for an easement. That gate they installed. He tapped the page. That's not enforcement. That's trespassing. It was like watching someone lift a rock and find a nest of wriggling contradictions underneath. According to that map, signed, sealed, and apparently ignored for 25 years, the gravel path was legally part of our land. The HOA had paved over it in the early 2000s, renamed it, and convinced everyone it was common property. But no deed transfer, no county filing, and definitely no consent had ever occurred. They thought they were building a gate, Elliot muttered, sipping his jet black coffee, but they were digging their own legal grave. The gate in question wasn't even impressive, just a sad aluminum archway with a keypad that beeped like a dying smoke detector. They'd slapped a private road sign on it in Comic Sans, and someone had even planted fake boxwood hedges on either side, as if plastic foliage could make a lie look legitimate. And yet, it had stood like a wall between Elliot and his grandkids, smug and unchallenged. Until now. Elliot didn't storm the HOA office. He didn't file a complaint on Facebook. He went straight to the county recorder's office with the original plat map, cross-referenced zoning revisions, and walked out with a notarized confirmation. The gate stood on private property, ours, period. That same day, Elliot found records of 3 other families in the neighborhood whose property boundaries had been quietly overridden on unofficial HOA welcome packets. One had a section of yard deemed common picnic space. Another had a garden path reassigned as a maintenance corridor. It was redrawing borders by clipboard, land theft by smiley brochure, and still Elliot didn't raise his voice. He just opened a clean manila folder, labeled it evidence of encroachment, and added the phrase illegal structure under the photo of the HOA gate, right next to Brenda's signature on the installation permit. I asked him what came next. He smirked. Well, if they want to charge me for accessing my own property, maybe it's time I start charging back. Let's see how they like tolls. At that moment, I realized something vital. Brenda and her HOA goons hadn't blocked a road. They'd activated a retired judge with a land deed and a grudge. And that, my friend, was far more dangerous than any gate code they could program. The letter was short, precise, and landed in the HOA's mailbox with the weight of a gavel. Printed on thick paper, double-spaced like it had somewhere official to be, it read, "Under Clause 14 of the HOA's governing bylaws, I formally request a hearing regarding unauthorized construction and policy enforcement inconsistent with county code." It was signed in blue ink. Judge Elliot Harper, retired. You could almost hear Brenda choke on her green smoothie when she opened it. Of course, they didn't respond immediately. That would have been too professional. Instead, 2 days later, we received a lukewarm email from admin at wleeharmony.org, which sounded more like a yoga retreat than a legal body. The message was a bureaucratic masterpiece. Please submit your concerns via proper quarterly channels. The next Community Concerns Forum is scheduled for September 17 at 3:45 p.m. Agenda items will be reviewed by the rotating feedback committee. Translation, go away quietly or die of paperwork. Elliot didn't blink. He printed the email, highlighted every vague phrase in yellow, then slipped it into a folder labeled Dodging Accountability. The next morning, he sent certified copies of the gate's property violation, the forged land maps, and Brenda's Comic Sans signage to 3 places: the County Planning Office, the Zoning and Records Division, and just for spice, Waverly Local News Weekly. No more whispers, he told me. Let's turn this into a conversation. And then it happened. A voicemail from a reporter named Elise Trent. Calm voice, crisp tone, but with that unmistakable journalistic hunger. Mr. Harper, we heard about the conflict with your HOA. We'd love to sit down and hear your side off the record or on. We've been covering homeowner abuse stories, and yours, well, let's just say the judge who went HOA hunting has a certain ring to it. I showed Elliot the voicemail. He raised an eyebrow. They're going to wish they stuck to bake sales. Meanwhile, the HOA board began scrimming. We saw Brenda twice that week, nervously circling the gate like she expected it to turn into a guillotine. Elliot, on the other hand, was a man in motion, quiet, focused, surgical. He sent follow-ups. He filed additional public record requests. He even drafted a formal motion citing Section 42 of the HOA's own charter that required immediate hearings if land disputes involved active access restrictions. They wrote these rules, he muttered, but I prosecuted people for less precise language than this. And then, in the most ironic twist of all, Brenda scheduled an informal coffee discussion at the community clubhouse. The flyer had a cartoon of a smiling house and read, "Let's chat about rules, respect, and community." It looked like something you'd hand out at a kindergarten orientation. Elliot posted his RSVP on the neighborhood forum. "I'll bring the property deed and the zoning code. You bring the coffee." Within an hour, the post had 47 likes and 12 passive-aggressive emojis. But here's the kicker. People started whispering. Quiet support from neighbors we'd never even spoken to. A single mom who'd been fined for a swing set. An elderly vet who'd been told his flag was too visually aggressive. A couple who'd received 3 warnings over flower pot colors. Brenda hadn't just made enemies. She'd built a coalition. As Elliot stacked the last of his documents into a leather briefcase older than half the HOA board, he paused and looked out the window toward the clubhouse. "They think they're dealing with a resident," he said. "What they don't realize is I'm treating this like a courtroom." I asked what his next move was. He just smiled. "I've given them every chance to play fair. Now I play my hand." And just as he zipped the case shut, the phone rang again. Elise Trent. This time, she wasn't asking politely. "Mr. Harper, we've seen the documents. We're going to run the story. Front page. Are you ready to talk?" Elliot leaned back, folded his hands, and said, "Let's make sure they spell my name right." It started with a few folding chairs and a pitcher of iced tea, the kind of Southern diplomacy reserved for neighborly gossip and polite takedowns. Elliot didn't make a flyer, didn't start a petition. He just told a few folks he'd be setting out some paperwork on the front lawn Saturday afternoon. If they wanted to learn how the HOA had been playing fast and loose with the rule book, they were welcome to swing by. By 2:00 p.m., we ran out of chairs. By 2:15, people were parking on the next block. At 2:30, someone brought cookies. And by 3:00, Elliot stood at the top step of the porch like a preacher with exhibits instead of scripture. He had 3 milk crates full of documentation, color-coded, tabbed, and labeled, like he was preparing for a Supreme Court rematch. No microphone, no stage, just a retired judge, a shady HOA, and a growing crowd thirsty for truth and maybe a little revenge. He didn't give a speech. That would have been too dramatic, too performative. Instead, he started telling stories, just calmly laid out the facts. The gate was built illegally. The visitor rule had been rewritten without a vote. The board had no easement rights. A few people gasped. A few more took notes. Then Elliot passed around a folder labeled Selective Enforcement Examples. That's when the fireworks started. The Jeffersons, who lived 2 doors down, flipped through the folder and went pale. "They fined us $300, 0 cents for wind chimes," Mr. Jefferson muttered. "Said it disrupted bird nesting." Another woman stood up. "They told me my garden gnome was a potential trip hazard for the elderly." A teenage boy chimed in. "We got a warning letter for sidewalk chalk. Said it was unauthorized expressive signage." Someone in the back shouted, "What does that even mean?" And just like that, the porch became a courtroom, minus the robes, plus lemonade. One by one, neighbors began sharing their own HOA horror stories. A veteran fined for displaying the flag before Memorial Day, a young couple cited for non-compliant curtain color, eggshell whisper apparently wasn't on the approved pallet, a single mom who got a $75 0 cents penalty for having solar string lights that created nighttime irregularity. Elliot just listened, nodded, and pointed to the relevant code each time. "That's not enforceable. This contradicts county regulation. That fine violates Clause 9, subsection D." It was like watching a legal roast. Sharp, funny, and backed by receipts. At one point, Brenda's assistant, Janine, walked by, clutching her HOA-issued tablet like a hostage note. She froze when she saw the crowd, then ducked behind a hedge like she could redact her own existence. Elliot didn't flinch. He just held up a document and said, "This one's my favorite. It's a warning letter about overly enthusiastic holiday decor." People burst out laughing. Who knew joy was a code violation? That was the moment everything shifted. People stopped being afraid and started being angry in a focused, productive, let's light this barred up kind of way. Someone asked if we could hold a formal vote. Another offered to contact the local paper. A retired accountant volunteered to review the HOA's last 5 budgets. Elliot didn't organize any of it. He just sipped his iced tea and smiled. You thought it was just about a visit. Nah, it was about an empire falling. And the best part, Brenda still thought this was about her gate. She had no idea that outside her pastel fortress, the villagers weren't just gathering pitchforks. They were preparing legal briefs. The clubhouse smelled like fear and Febreze. The HOA had finally caved and scheduled an emergency hearing, which in Karen speak meant a desperate attempt to look official while hoping no one brings a lawyer. Elliot didn't bring a lawyer either. He brought a stenographer, a rolling briefcase, and the kind of smile that made grown men wish they'd stayed in accounting. Brenda was already sweating through another pastel tracksuit, flanked by her board. 3 dudes with clipboards and a woman who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. They expected Elliot to walk in solo, maybe flustered, maybe apologetic. Instead, he calmly set down 3 labeled folders on the fold-out table: evidence, violations, and witnesses, and placed a digital recorder on top. Then he turned to the stenographer and said, "We're live. Document under open meeting statutes." Brenda blinked like someone who just realized she was playing chess with a man who brought his own board. "This isn't a public hearing," she snapped. Elliot didn't even look up. "It is now." The board tried to start with a prepared statement. Elliot cut them off with page 12 of their own bylaws, highlighted, annotated, and footnoted. He quoted zoning laws like a man reciting wedding vows. He pulled out county maps older than Brenda's toner cartridge and compared them side by side with the HOA's official overlays. "This map," he said flatly, "is doctored, and that's not an allegation, it's a felony." The room went silent, except for the soft clacking of the stenographer's keys. Brenda stammered something about legacy access rights. Elliot handed her a notarized document from the zoning office dated 1999. "Your legacy ended 24 years ago." A board member asked for a break. Another mumbled something about needing legal counsel. Elliot took a sip from his thermos and replied, "You had a chance to bring counsel. You chose a clipboard." Then Brenda made her final stand. "You don't even live here," she said, voice cracking. "You have no standing." That's when Elliot calmly reached into his briefcase and pulled out a freshly signed deed. "Correction," he said. "I now own 10% of the property at 104 Maple Grove Lane. Congratulations. I am, in fact, your neighbor." The woman on the board gasped. One of the men whispered, "Holy crap," under his breath. The look on Brenda's face, priceless, like someone just told her kale causes wrinkles. He didn't need to yell. The documents screamed for him. They tried to adjourn the meeting, called it an executive session, which in HOA language means, "We're losing. Run." Elliot packed up his folders, nodded to the stenographer, and walked out with the kind of calm only a man who's been waiting 3 decades to say checkmate without raising his voice could possess. But this wasn't the end. This was the part where the judge left the courtroom and the townspeople started banging on the gates with torches made of legal precedent. What Brenda didn't know was that this wasn't a defense. This was a prosecution in slow motion, and the jury was the entire neighborhood. It arrived like a bad prank, handwritten, folded in thirds, and stuffed in a manila envelope with no return address. The handwriting looked like it had been scrawled by someone halfway through a bottle of white wine and a meltdown. Inside, a legal complaint. Brenda, in her infinite wisdom, had filed a personal lawsuit against Judge Elliot Harper, accusing him of defamation, harassment, and, my personal favorite, orchestrating a targeted character assassination. The complaint was riddled with typos, random capitalizations, and the kind of grammar that made you wonder if she'd dictated it to her cat. Elliot read it twice, let out a small sigh, then handed it to me like he was passing over a takeout menu. "Does this look like someone orchestrating anything?" he asked, deadpan. "I mean, sure, if you considered highlighting bylaws and quoting zoning code assassination, then yes, the man was lethal." But Brenda had made one crucial mistake. She filed it without an attorney. And if you're going to pick a fight with a retired state judge, maybe, just maybe, don't bring a pencil when he's bringing a printer. Elliot's response wasn't just a rebuttal. It was a masterpiece, 43 pages of surgical precision. It included time-stamped photos, receipts, zoning declarations, and a cross-referenced index of every violation Brenda had made since 2017. He even attached screenshots of HOA board chat logs, leaked anonymously, that included gems like, "Let's fine him until he breaks," and "He thinks he's smarter just because he's a judge." Turns out he was. 1 week after filing the response, the county housing office issued a public notice. Due to mounting complaints and documented irregularities, a full financial audit of the HOA would begin immediately. They didn't say Elliot's name. They didn't have to. The office Brenda once treated like her personal war room was now locked. The pastel queen had vanished. Some said she'd fled to her sister's place in Palm Desert. Others claimed she'd checked herself into a wellness retreat. But the HOA office phone line rang unanswered, and the only thing in the drop box was an angry note written on a napkin. Where's my mailbox fine refund? The board tried to regroup. Emails were sent, language like temporary reorganization and unforeseen leadership transition started floating around. But nobody was buying it. You can't rule with a pastel fist and then expect people to forget once the glitter wears off. What they didn't realize was this wasn't damage control. This was a funeral in slow motion, and the casket was full of forged permits and empty promises. One resident printed Brenda's complaint, framed it, and hung it in his garage with a Post-it that said, "Oh-ho greatest hits, track 13, defamation karaoke." You rule with a pastel fist. Now she can't even get a meeting. And just when you thought it was over, the audit team showed up with clipboards, body cameras, and a warrant. Turns out the HOA had not only broken its own rules, they danced all over county regulations like it was prom night in 1993. And at the center of every payment trail, every forged memo, every shady landscaping invoice, Blur's signature in big loopy letters like a toddler trying to spell queen. But don't get comfortable, because if you think the pastel empire has fully crumbled, just wait until the neighborhood finds out where the money really went. The dissolution order came on a Tuesday morning, slipped under doors like a reverse eviction notice, one that kicked the bullies out instead. The county had finished the audit faster than anyone expected, and the findings were damning. Misappropriated funds, faked permits, ghost landscaping bills. HOA Karen had managed to turn suburban governance into a low-budget crime syndicate with pastel branding. The commissioners didn't just suspend the board, they nuked it from orbit. Brenda and her loyal clipboard brigade were banned from holding any administrative role in the county permanently. The HOA as a legal entity was dissolved. Gone, wiped from the books like a failed school project labeled, "Don't let Susan be in charge." In their place, the county appointed an interim resident committee. 3 neighbors with no previous power hunger, no matching polos, just common sense and a vendetta against stupidity. There was Mrs. Langston, who once got fined for wind chimes. There was Jalen, a high school civics teacher with an actual spine. And then there was Sheila, who once been warned her hydrangeas were emotionally aggressive. Their first act, public transparency. Their second, ordering pizza for the first meeting. That alone made them more effective than the last decade of pastel tyranny. The community changed fast. Flyers with threats about mailbox sizes were replaced by open invite barbecues. Kids rode scooters again. Dogs barked freely. Someone even dared to plant a flag on a Tuesday. And nobody got fined. Then one morning, a mural appeared on the clubhouse wall. It was hand-painted by neighborhood kids. It showed a cartoon version of Elliot Harper, gavel in one hand, folder in the other, with the words, "No more nonsense." He pretended to be embarrassed, but you could catch him stopping in front of it for just a second too long. You'd think this was the end, but no, something else happened, something simple. The gate, the same HOA-installed gate that had stopped Elliot that first Sunday, was gone. In its place stood a new wooden sign, carved by hand, sanded smooth, and nailed into the post like a final verdict. It read, "Welcome home, Judge." No one knew who made it. No one claimed credit. But from that day on, whenever Elliot passed by, he'd give it a tiny nod like he was saluting an old friend. The community never asked him to join the new board. He didn't want to, but he came to every meeting, sat in the back with his same black coffee, answered legal questions when asked, and never raised his voice. Because he didn't have to. And when reporters came calling, asking for a statement about how he brought down a corrupt HOA and restored balance to suburbia, he just said, "I didn't bring anything down, I just held up a mirror." Somewhere between the gates removal and the new mural, someone asked Elliot what the moral of all this was. He stirred his coffee and said, "Power doesn't corrupt, cowards do. And sometimes it takes one calm old man with a folder to remind people what justice smells like." That night, the neighborhood threw a block party, not in celebration, but in recognition. There were folding chairs and string lights, potluck dishes and lemonade. People laughed without looking over their shoulders. And Elliot, he sat on the porch, root beer float in hand. As Ella curled up next to him with her glitter sign now framed and hung on the wall behind them. The war had ended, the gate was gone, but justice had just moved in. Here's the real takeaway. You don't need a badge, a title, or even a loud voice to dismantle a broken system. Sometimes all it takes is one retired grandpa, a folder full of facts, and the guts to say, nah, not today. Rules aren't the enemy. Blind obedience is. Whether it's an HOA, a school board, or your office's self-proclaimed snack czar, the moment people stop asking questions is when the nonsense wins. So ask, push back, be that one calm person who brings receipts. If this story lit even a tiny fire in your chest, hit that like button, drop your wildest HOA or neighborhood tyrant story in the comments. We read every single one. And hey, don't forget to subscribe for more battles where justice shows up, sometimes in a lawn chair with iced tea. No more nonsense, right? Let's go.